Intrigued by the unusual paper plate wheels under the VMT's J.W. Bowker and his research led to today's presentation. Please welcome Bill Taylor. Bill, take it away.
Thank you. Okay.
Whoops. Can I go back to that other screen? I need to adjust.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Pull
There
it.
we go.
Okay, there we go.
Make this higher.
All right.
Okay, bunch of heads. Front row.
Well, I apologize. I slept pretty crazy last night, so my brain's a little fuzzy, so you have to forgive me here. Also, you'll have to excuse my naivete. I'm new to the VNT. I probably wrote it 30 years ago, and haven't really paid much attention to the VNT since then. So the things I'm getting excited about, I realize are all old hat to you guys. So paper core wheels. On the surface of it, that sounds kind of like a ridiculous proposition. Why would you think of making wheels, railroad wheels, out of paper? Well, one day the Bowker was in a museum and I happened to walk by it, and for some reason a couple weeks ago I had read about paper core wheels, and it did double take because I spotted the bolt pattern. I thought, wait, what? Those look like paper wheels. And you notice for some reason the bolt patterns aren't even, bolts aren't even the same on multiple wheels on the tender. So I thought, well, I'll look at the back of those wheels. There's the patent date. It's noticed this is one of the patents that Allen took out for the wheels, patented July 16th, 1872. So lo and behold, crawling into the locomotive a couple weeks ago on the back of the wheels, there is July 1872. So that pretty well convinced me at that point that, okay, these are paper core wheels. Because the patent date matches, the bolt pattern matches, they look like paper wheels. So then I got intrigued about, okay, what's the deal with paper core railroad wheels? So how do they come about? Like most inventions, of course, things don't usually pop out of nowhere. There's always some context and backstory that produced an invention. And the paper wheels aren't any different. So we need to go back in time a little bit. There are a number of contributing factors that resulted in the development of the paper wheels. Development of paper-making technologies was one. People wanted quieter and smoother riding railroad cars, passenger cars, and then there were actually issues with the cast iron wheels at the time the paper core wheels were developed. So what happened? You have to go back to the 18th century England, the beginning of what was called the Japanning trade. Japanese were making all kinds of things out of laminated, baked, lacquered sheets of paper. Trays, boxes, clock cases, other kinds of furniture, large pieces of furniture, even structural or decorative walls for residences were being made out of lacquered paper. So this public began developing a serious interest in paper products in general. They were useful, they were practical, and of course that was only if you could afford them. You had to be pretty wealthy to afford those products at the time. But this set the stage for a developing interest in paper products as something serious that could be used for serious uses. So in 1816, the paper-making machine was invented. This was critical. It was rapidly adopted across the United States, but there was one problem. Paper manufacturing was still dependent on rags. So that limited production, so that it was not as widespread or as affordable paper products as they were to become in the near future. After the Civil War, 1861 to 1865, they discovered that they could make paper out of wood pulp. So as a result of being able to make paper out of wood pulp, paper making of all kinds exploded across the United States. Uses of paper increased 4 times in the decade between 1870 and 1880. So the public was now very interested in paper products, using paper products, and more importantly, they trusted paper products. Seems impossible to believe today that they didn't, but there was a time when paper products in general distribution were new. And of course, it's what often happens in any kind of, from a statement by an individual who is involved in a trade we get grandiose statements, but this is a statement that was made in a print trade journal from 1889. We're apparently going to have a world that existed of almost exclusively paper products. But you notice paper wheels were mentioned. So, imperfections in the track were being transmitted pretty much directly into passenger cars. In the 1800s, the ride was harsh and it was noisy. So suspension systems were unsophisticated. They didn't absorb the sharp shocks well. This is up until the early mid-1800s. So because the railroad traffic, passenger traffic was constantly increasing, there was a demand for luxury and comfort because the wealthy and business people were primarily the people who used the upper levels of railroad transportation comfort. They were demanding a better ride. White's American Railroad Passenger Car book, excellent book, has 16 pages just devoted to talking about railroad trucks and suspensions, and 14 more pages devoted just to discussing railroad wheels from the time period. So the most stressed element, arguably at least equal to, if not more so than coupling systems, were railroad wheels. Initially, the tires on the railroad wheels were flat, and because of course you had curves to go around, the torsion effects from trying to go around curves using a flat tire were absorbed by the axles, and in many cases it broke the axles. So it was in the 1830s, I believe, that the cone concept for railroad wheel tires was developed, letting it slip along the rail slightly in one direction so that you had a differential between the diameters of the wheels. The earliest railroad car wheels were patterned after wood-spoke wagon wheels, of course, and they just added a flange tire fastened over the rim of the wheel. American practice added an iron hub in the center of the wood, but still used wood spokes. An additional comment about the coned railroad flange. Toward the end of the Civil War, the South was running some gauge that was 4 foot 10 inches and some gauge that was 5 feet. And so initially what they did was they just actually made extra wide tires. And so at one point there were actually 175,000 railroad cars with these extra wide tires. It worked all right as long as speeds were really low, and you can imagine when the extra wide tires were running on the wide track, there was tremendous hunting going on. So it worked for slow speeds, but didn't work when speeds began to increase. So American practice, like I said, to improve the strength of those wheels, they added an iron hub, wood spokes, wood rim, and a flange tire on the outside. Looked like that. They actually uncovered one of these. Most of it was gone, of course, but there was enough of it left that they were able to reconstruct it. And the reconstructed version of that early railroad wheel is in the Smithsonian. So American practice switched to all wrought iron construction bolted together around 1840. That was an improvement over the wood railroad wheels, but they had a tendency to come apart. So then came chilled tires bolted on. They were stronger, they lasted longer, too expensive. So then they tried wrought iron spoked wheels imported from England. They worked pretty well, same problem, too expensive. So went back to solid cast iron with a hard chilled tread again. Problems, they cracked a lot, so they would fracture and break apart, cause a derailment. There were often hidden flaws in the iron casting, which caused the same problem. They were never perfectly round. They were all slightly out of round. And one big problem was they were one wear. So by the time the tread wore out, you recycled it, threw it away. So there's an early example of a cast spoked iron wheel. And there's some examples of some plate solid cast iron wheels that still had ribbing in the back for strength. One interesting side note is that the cracking was such a serious problem that in the Northeast in the wintertime, they actually had to slow the trains down because the iron became so brittle that it would fracture due to the cold temperatures, and they actually had to drop the speed on the trains about 10 miles an hour to try to avoid some of the fracturing. So of course, they were looking for better solutions. Along comes Richard Allen. Richard Allen was an itinerant boomer. He had a number of different occupations. Sometime inventor. He invented axle boxes and an earlier wheel type, but there doesn't seem to be any indication that any of those earlier inventions were actually manufactured. So the composite tire wheels were back in favor in the mid-1800s again. And can you see that? Can you read that in the back? Anybody? Oh, okay to read it in the back. So he tried a number of occupations. His brother decided to have him buy into a strawboard business. The problem was there were a lot of strawboard businesses, and he rapidly found himself losing money. So he, of course, was familiar with the wood fabricated railroad wheels and decided to try strawboard. So they glued sheets of paper together, pressed it under a 650-ton press for 3 hours with a flour paste, threw it in a heated room to dry for a couple weeks, drilled holes through it, bolted flat iron plate on one side, bolted a flanged iron piece on the other side, and bingo, he had a paper core railroad wheel. There's a list of the patents. The earliest patent was 1869. The one on the Bowker was 1872. Came up with some more modern versions, modernized versions of the patent. You'll notice the one I've got highlighted up there. Notice one of the partners in the patent, Albert B. Pullman. Pullman's brother, George Pullman's brother, was a partner in with Allen. Might have had something to do with something that happened. I'll mention in a minute. Down at the bottom, you can see the bottom images of an advertisement for Allen's Paper Car Wheel Company. And there you notice in the advertisement circled in red, he mentions locomotive and tender trucks. George Pullman purchased 100 of Allen's wheels. They worked out great. They were about the same density as ivory. And so whereas the flange and the flat plate was bolted to the paper core, the core was mounted directly on the axle. So it actually provided some cushioning. So it overcame some of the harshness, softened the rod a little bit. It definitely cushioned some of the noise and eliminated some of the noise in the passenger cars. Pullman tried more. They didn't have problems with them. They worked very well. They deadened the ride. Pullman actually built an Allen paper core plant right at Pullman to manufacture cars for his Pullmans. And 1886, there were 60,000 paper core wheels in service. 7 years later, 115,000. So they later updated it to using 200 sheets, changed the glue, changed the process a little bit. They bought their steel, the steel bolt-on components they bought from other companies. Some of them were even good quality Bessemer steel. They changed the process to not use as much pressure. Like I said, they changed the glue mechanism. They were made in 36 to 54 inch diameters. They weighed 1,115 pounds, and only 200 of which was actually the hardened paper core. There's what was left at one point of the Allen Wheel Factory in Pullman. So Pullman, of course, was quite the promoter, and he actually prided himself on pointing out the novelty of the paper core wheels that he was using on his cars. There was an 1877 promotional excursion. While our party was viewing the exterior of the vehicle, Mr. George Pullman himself strolled up. Pointing to the wheels, he made the somewhat alarming announcement that they were made of paper. In proportion to its weight, he said, "Good paper, properly prepared, is one of the strongest substances in the world. It offers resistance to fracture in all directions. While the toughest woods are sometimes liable to crack and split under severe trial, The ordinary iron becomes brittle from the constant jarring of the smoothest of steel rails. Paper possesses a certain amount of elasticity, very desirable in a car wheel. So it works very well. By 1900, nearly all of Pullman's car had paper core wheels. Here's an example. I doubt this is a Pullman because it doesn't say Pullman anywhere. This is in the museum in Golden, Colorado, I believe. Colorado Midland observation car. It's got paper wheels. Signifying item in the paper wheels is always the fact that they're bolted together. So you can always see a bolt pattern of some kind or other. Pullman made actually a cutaway for the New Orleans 1884 exposition and donated it then to the Smithsonian in 1888, and apparently I think it still exists in the Smithsonian. That, of course, generated copiers. They were made in England under agreement with Allen in 1875. This one, I'm not sure, it's stamped Latrobe. It looks very similar to the bolt pattern on Allen's, but a little bit different. So I'm not sure, it might be a different manufacturer. There's 4 other patents for and advertisements for 4 other different types of paper cord wheels. Notice, interestingly, one of them is made of hemp. Hemp, of course, provided a lot of the rope used in our Navy in World War II. Can't get high on hemp. It would kill you trying to smoke it before it gets you high. I don't say that from experience. This is a truck set, 6-wheel truck set with paper wheels made by the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy. I don't know if they manufactured their own paper wheels or if those were actually Allen's wheels on there. But as you can see, they were widely used. They were not an uncommon thing at all. This is a very rough Google translation, and you might just want to look at the yellow parts, from a Polytechnische Journal in German from 1881. So the Germans developed their own version of the paper cord wheel. And they commented that they have been produced in America for 10 years already. So they were in use not only around the United States, but in fact around the world. However, the end of paper core wheels was coming. You can see in here the bolt pattern. There was a lawsuit over this particular accident. I believe it killed some people. And in the lawsuit, it was determined that the paper cord wheels were, in fact, the cause of the wreck. What happened was the railroad cars were switching to steel. They were running the trains at faster speeds. That was causing the bolts to work loose. Also, the heat from the application of the brakes and the tires was becoming an issue. I think what happened was, instead of issuing a set of regulations demanding or requiring inspection and maintenance of the bolts on the paper core wheels, in 1915, the Interstate Commerce Commission, they just outlawed them. But they outlawed them for passenger service. They didn't outlaw them for freight service or maintenance the way it is. The Allen paper plant at Pullman was abandoned in 1923. They actually still remained in use for many years. The St. Louis Car Company used them until the late 50s and early 60s on their streetcars, mainly for replacement duty. They did put new ones on, but they replaced the ones that wore out. Here's a shot of the beginning of the process of replacing the paper core wheels with standard cast plate wheels. But they're not quite gone. I found this picture on the internet. This is a Denver and Rio Grande rotary snowplow, and it's got paper core wheels. Like most pieces of railroad equipment, whenever a truck is maintained, the date of the last maintenance is stenciled. Stencil date on this Denver and Rio Grande car is September 1965. So in 1965, the Denver and Rio Grande was still using paper core wheels. So we're talking around 1870 to 1865. That's 95 years that paper core wheels were in use. By the way, how many of you here have not heard of paper core railroad wheels before? There's a few people. Good. Yeah, I was, of course, it's always fun to say paper wheels because, like, what? What do you mean? So, what about the Bowker? This is the builder's photo of the Bowker from the 1881 Baldwin catalog. Definitely does not have paper core wheels. Those are plate wheels. So it didn't come out of the factory that way. However, there's no known photograph of the Bowker on the Virginian Truckee with paper core tender wheels. But the Sierra Nevada Wood and Lumber Company, if you blow it up enough, did I blow it up? Yeah, I blew it up. You can clearly see the paper core wheels on the tender by the time the Sierra Nevada Wood and Lumber Company got the locomotive. Wasn't the only Virginian Truckee locomotive that had paper core wheels. Thanks to Stephen Drew. Here's a picture of a maintenance log from Carson City. Paper core wheels on the Inyo. Note it says tender cost $690 when complete, $172.50 a pair. Well, in 1893 they were only paying $49.50 for a 30-inch plate wheel set. So why was the V&T spending $172.50 a pair on paper core wheels? Suspect that there's no pictures on the V&T that we know of, that Stephen Drew could find, of a passenger car on the Virginian Truckee with paper core wheels on it. Only the locomotive tenders. So this, obviously they don't need a softer ride on a tender. V&T went through trucks very fast. Inyo went through 10 pairs of wheels and a dozen pairs of lead engine trucks during the 90s. Suspect maybe that the V&T was looking for a more cost-effective way, less expensive way to provide the massive quantities of tendered wheels and lead engine trucks they were going through. So they probably figured that maybe because the paper core wheels weren't a throwaway wheel, but you replaced the bolt-on flange, that overall, over the life of the wheels, it was less expensive. It must not have been that way. Just guessing, because they didn't seem to show up very much. There's no record in the Virginia City records about the Bowker with any notation of paper core wheels being put on it, because, like Stephen said, there are very few records existent of from the Virginia shops. And the Bowker was used for switching service, so it probably wasn't high on the list of documenting. The Bowker, when it went to the Sierra Nevada Wood and Lumber Company, probably the locomotive wasn't used that much. So in talking to Stephen, it's probably likely that it arrived from the Virginian Truckee with its paper core wheels, and they just never wore them out, never had to replace them. So we're lucky to have that example of locomotive tender with paper core wheels. I don't know that it might be the only one left. I'm not know that for sure, but I'm guessing there's probably very, very few locomotives left in the United States that have paper core wheels on its tender. The Bowker may be the only one. So until the locomotive decides to talk to us, or somebody invents a time machine, and we can go back and ask people, we really don't know for sure when they got put on the Bowker, why they got put on the Bowker and the other locomotives. So that's it. You get to go to lunch early. I'd like to especially thank Stephen Drew for helping me out with this little project. And it was fun learning about paper core railroad wheels. Any questions? Yes.
You could ride on paper core wheels today, but going to San Francisco and hopping on the PCC.
Really? Oh, that's good to know. Now I'm gonna have to go do that. Wow, thank you.